Okay, so last time we talked about Torah Shebechtav being Shemaim, and Torah Sheba'al Peh being Aretz. And we said about the Shemaim that Shemaim are transparent. In that sense, the Torah is like
one
light.
One is Gemara and one is...
no, not necessarily Gemara, but the whole Torah Sheba'al Peh. And the earth makes it actually felt. And we give the old mashal that we always give, which is that space is cold and there's no light, but the moment that the light from the sun or from any star hits a solid surface like the earth, then suddenly you see the light makes an impact, and it becomes warm, and life is possible. So the same thing is true about us, that the Torah that we receive, Torah Shebechtav, is only complete when we develop Torah Sheba'al Peh, when we reveal the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And then he says, what comes down is the Or Ein Sof, is the infinite light of Hashem, which can then come down into the whole vessel and light scheme here, which is Torah Shebechtav and Torah Sheba'al Peh. So Torah Shebechtav is the light.
If you don't call Torah Sheba'al Peh the Gemara, you include everything else?
Yeah, of course. Everything the Chazal did, and everything that we've been doing since.
You call Nach Torah Sheba'al Peh?
No. Nach is an extension of Torah Shebechtav.
And the Arizal and everything else, that's
Torah Sheba'al Peh.
Yeah. Okay. No, I always thought it was just the Gemara or Mishnah.
No. Everything we've developed. All the Midrashim, all that Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's true that he stresses here the side of the mitzvahs. Okay, but you can't take the Medrash and everything else out of Torah Sheba'al Peh, even though it's not dealing with mitzvahs. And by the way, there are opinions, and this is also brought in some Maimarim, that all the Midrashim, everything that's around, are really for the mitzvot shebalev. They're really in order to teach you to fear Hashem, to love Hashem, and so on. So that's really what the Medrash does. Okay. And the Hemedim, then he said they're the witnesses. And what does it mean that they're the witnesses? שעל-ידי כל מצווה ומצווה ממשיכים גילוי אור אינסוף ברוך הוא בתורה. So because of this, somewhere here, כל מצווה ומצווה ממשיכים גילוי אור אינסוף ברוך הוא בתורה. So that what we get is that thanks to this light inside a vessel, inside Torah Sheba'al Peh, every mitzvah that we do, it brings down the infinite light. Because the Torah itself is not the infinite light, like we said before.
That's doing a mitzvah. What happens if you don't do a mitzvah?
Even
what does that do to the light?
Even if you're only dealing with the halacha of the mitzvah.
No, you do something that the Torah says you're not allowed to do. What does that do to the light? Sends it away. Breaks the clean.
I guess so. What do I do? כמאמר דלית מחשב התפיסה בי, כי אם על ידי השגת התורה וקיום המצוות, because nothing can capture the divine, it's too infinite, except for through understanding Torah and performance of mitzvot. Through that, ממשיכים גילוי אלוקותו יתברך להיות שורה ומתלבש בהם. And from that, we're able to enclose the infinite light in reality, in what we do. כמו שכתוב, ואלה המצוות אשר יעשה אותם האדם וחי בהם, בהם דייקה. פירוש, שממשיך אור אינסוף בחיי החיים להיות שורה בהם וכולו. ולכן אמרו רז"ל, ועשיתם אותם, או אתם כתיב, כאילו עשאוני, ועשיתם אתם. Meaning that without the performance of mitzvot, it's as if Hashem's infinite light is not in reality at all. It is, of course, but it's not enclosed. It is in the sense of what we call inspiration, of Hashra'ah, but it's not in the sense of enclosement.
I didn't understand that. Say that again.
The infinite light of Hashem is everywhere anyway.
Okay.
The question is whether it will be revealed in some way. To be revealed, it has to have a garment. And the garment is created, that's what he's saying here. The garment is created through our mitzvahs, through our learning of Torah with both the Torah Shebechtav and Torah Sheba'al Peh.
But you need to have Hashem's infinite light to know what the mitzvah is.
Right.
Before you do it.
No, you need the Torah. You don't need you learn from the Torah. The Torah is not yet the infinite light. The Torah is only the vessel. The two parts of the Torah are only the vessel for bringing down, for enclosing the infinite light.
How can you understand what Hashem wants if you're not already connected to Hashem? Because you could say, oh, Hashem wants to stick an orange on Sukkot, right? How do you know it has to be an Esrog? It says in the Shulchan Aruch. How do you know it says in the Shulchan Aruch? You're going to learn it. So they have to be connected to Hashem to be able to come to the conclusion that this Pri Hadar is not a tomato. You know?
Rabbi Isaac says something very interesting. He says, theoretically, anybody could learn Torah Shabbat. Even a non-Jew can.
Mm-hmm.
But they might come up with an orange instead of a etrog.
Okay.
He says that the ability to come up with the right interpretation, or at least that this will be the interpretation that Hashem signs off on, that depends on the Jewish mind. He says a non-Jewish mind wouldn't come to this. It would come to different things, to different understandings. And so he says, yes, like what you're saying, that there's something in the mind itself that's already connected to Hashem in a certain way, so that this aligns. Another way of thinking of it is that for the mind, for the mind of the scholar to be able to understand what the Torah Shebechtav means, so you have to assume that the mind of the scholar is also part of the Torah.
But the Shach,
because otherwise,
the Shach and the Taz and everybody else, it says they all had Ruach HaKodesh. And what does that mean? It means they were connected to Hashem, no?
okay, but you have to go a step further. You have to say it's not just Ruach HaKodesh, it's also their brain. Their brain thinks a certain way. It's the same question that's asked today in physics about why is it the human mind can figure out the laws of nature. How is that possible? Why would it be able to? Why wouldn't it make up something that's wrong? Which it did for a while.
Many times.
And it still does. But why does it have any success at all? That's very surprising. So you could say, yeah, it's a fluke. We've had more failures than success. It doesn't feel that way today. It feels that by using mathematics, which seems to be something of a natural language for us to use, we are able, in a sense, to capture what nature is doing. And that's a big question. It's the question of...
You're insinuating that mathematics is something holy?
I'm not insinuating anything. I'm just saying it works.
No, I'm saying...
I don't know what that means.
I'm saying,
It means that it's tied into the general structure of the universe. So the answer that... It's a very difficult question. I don't know what... I haven't heard a very good answer yet. The answers range from, well, what do you expect? The human brain was created by nature. So its constructs should be similar. But that doesn't work very well because the human brain really isn't built for the type of mathematics that describes nature. It's built for the type of mathematics that describes human effort, but not for the type that describes nature. That's a difference between discrete and continuous mathematics. The human brain is built for discrete mathematics, which is what you and I do. We have whole books. We don't have 1.3 books anywhere, right? Nature, on the other hand, is built around continuous mathematics, which is something completely different. And the human brain isn't very good with it. It can manipulate it. It finds ways of working around it, like the calculus, but it doesn't do a very good job. So that's not a great answer, that it came out of nature, so that's why it thinks differently than nature. So I don't know what the answer is. But when it comes to Torah, so the Rambam tells us what the answer is. Rambam tells us that really there are three components here. He only mentioned two of them. He said there is the Torah Shebechtav, Torah Shebal Peh. Says the Rambam, really you need another piece, like you just said. You need the brain. You need the mind of the person learning. So what would we call these three pieces? It's called Yodea, Mada, Yadua. So the Yodea is the person. The Mada, the power of thought, that's the Torah Shebal Peh. And the Yadua, and what you know, is the Torah Shebechtav. You really need all three of them. And when you have all three of them, then you have a full picture. What is this like? So he says, know that in Hashem, all three of them are the same thing. In Hashem, hu hamada, hu hayodea, hu hayadua. And in a way that they're all one, in a way that you can't understand. Because for us, it's three different things. There's the Torah Shebechtav, there's my mind, and then there's the thinking that comes out of it, which is the Torah Shebal Peh.
Is it similar to Sipur, Sefer?
Same. Very, very similar idea. Okay. If you say it in Kabbalistic language, Sofer, Sefer, V'Sipur. In the beginning of Sefer Yetzirah, the world is written with three books. The writer, the Sofer, the Sefer, what he writes, and the Sipur, what he tells, the story that he tells. Okay? Except there, it's a little bit different because the known is the Sipur. And it's not clear if it was known beforehand or if it is known only after you write it. Okay? Here, it's very clear that the Yadua is the Torah Shebechtav, it was known beforehand. There's a little bit of a difference. If you say this in Kabbalistic language, how do you say it? Chochma, Bina, and Das. Chochma is what's known. The Bina is call it the thinking process that happens, the Torah Shebal Peh. And the Dat is the person, is the Yodea, is the one who. So really you need three things here. So what you're saying is, yes, if the mind wasn't part of this whole story, then really it wouldn't be the best thing. It wouldn't fit. It wouldn't work. So says Rabbi Isaac, know that there are different deot, and kel acher istaris. And if you have a false god, your mind, your thought doesn't work right. It's warped. And so therefore you'll come in between the Torah Shebechtav and Torah Shebal Peh and you make a whole mess out of it. Which is exactly what they do. Okay? They also learn Chumash, but they come up with nonsense. They certainly don't come out with mitzvahs. And even when they think of mitzvahs, they get it wrong. That was like the argument with the Kareim, or with the Tzdukim, or with this and that. You have to be you're part of a. So really, when somebody is learning Torah, and he's bridging the gap between Torah Shebechtav and Torah Shebal Peh, he himself, his mind is bridging the gap between them. He's creating this threesome. That's an incarnation of the infinite light. That's what it means. Because in Hashem, this all exists as one thing. Okay? So you're right. There's a third element here, which is the person. But that's what he's saying. He's saying all the time that you need Yisrael in the middle. And that's why Hashem checks to see if this is happening. And then when they are able to take the Torah Shebechtav and create the Torah Shebal Peh, then the infinite light appears. כמו שכתוב, אלה המצוות אשר עשה אותם אדם וחי בהם, דייקה, פירוש שממשיך אור אינסוף בחיי החיים להיות שורה בהם, ולכן אמור הז"ל ועשיתם אותם. So now you would say that the way that Hashem is present, the infinite light is present without these three parts, in its wholeness, that's called Hashra, that's called inspiration. And that's everywhere anyway. But it's not revealed. It's not in our world. And for it to come down into our world, you need these three elements joining together. אתם כתיב כאילו עשרוני, וזהו עניין עוסק בתורה לשמה, ופירוש לשם התורה עצמה, כי על ידי זה הוא קורא וממשיך גילוי אור אינסוף בתורה כנ"ל. And that's how you bring down the infinite light in Torah. וזהו שכתוב כל הנקרא בשמי ולכבודי בראתי וצרתי ואף עשיתי. There's a pasuk in Yeshaya that says that everything that I've called by my name, and for my honor I have created it, I have formed it, I have even made it. Okay? And from this pasuk we learn the four worlds of Atzilut, which is Lichvodi, my honor, Brati v'tzarti v'asiti, Bria Yetzira Asiya. כל הנקרא בשמי, היינו כללות נשמות ישראל שבראם לכבודו. That's why it's called Kiseh HaKavod. Okay? The kavod is sitting on the kiseh. That's one of the meanings. There's a number of times that the Nevi'im mention Kiseh HaKavod, the throne of honor. So what's sitting on the throne? Honor is sitting on the throne because it's the throne of honor. So honor, the throne is the world of the kiseh, that's Bria. And what's sitting on it, and what is sitting on it, the honor, that's Atzilus. That's the Lichvodi here. Same idea. So it's called kiseh HaKavod.
Why is it Atzilus?
Why do we call it Atzilus, or why?
No, why is Kavod Atzilus?
First of all, because that's what fits.
Okay.
In four worlds, Atzilus is above Bria, and here we have Kavod above Bria. Kavod sitting. Why is Kavod? So now we'll give an explanation. Everything that was created in my name, or called in my name, that's the totality of the souls of Israel, which he created for his honor. ואין כבוד אל התורה, כי התורה היא בחינת לבושים. And kavod, honor, means a type of garment, right? Like Rabbi Yochanan, דקרא למאני מכבדותא, כמו שכתוב ותאור כסלמה, והיינו כמאמר ז"ל, דרבי יוחנן קרא למאני מכבדותא, שהוקמו על דרך המלך, על דרך משל. המלך אין רואים אותו כשהוא ערום, זולתי כשהוא מלובש בלבוש מלכות. So the world of Atzilus is called that because it's called kavod, because it's the first garment that Hashem wears. It's the first time that you can have some kind of contact with the infinite.
Metaphorically speaking.
Of course. And if and the king is not a king if he's not dressed. And if he's just naked, running around, he's another guy. But you know him the moment that he dresses a certain way. אך המלך בעצמו ובכבודו אין דרכו להלביש את עצמו זולתי שהעבד מלביש אותו. But the important thing here in this mashal is, and you have to watch kings getting dressed in the morning to know this, is that they don't dress themselves. Okay? If anybody who was very wealthy back in the time of the Alter Rebbe, there were no buttons yet. You know the whole thing with buttons. There were no buttons. Okay? Buttons are new. לא, זה לא כפתורים.
זה לא כפתורים של בן?
לא, זה משהו אחר לגמרי. There were no buttons on clothing apparently until sometime in the 19th century. Exactly when, I'm not sure. They didn't figure it out yet.
So how do they close their clothes?
They sewed it. They sewed it.
Every time took your shirt off, they sewed it.
No, so their shirts didn't have an opening like ours. It wasn't so comfortable. You had to put it up. It was like a tunic. You had to put it from above.
היה פתאום סויר.
Good. Everybody wore clothing that was closed. At most, if they had a button, there was one, maybe it was here. At most. But everything else was something that you wore. So how did you actually wear like a fancy dress that you can't get it over yourself? They had to sew it on. So it wasn't a sew like, it's not like, the way our clothing is sewn like this, that you had to rip it to get it open. But it was sewing. The mamish you needed, if you were going to anything fancy and you had a fancy dress or a fancy shirt or whatever it was, you had to have it sewn on. It's a famous thing. This ended sometime in the 19th century. I'm not sure when. It's one of those things that the modern person can't even begin to wrap his head around. That I couldn't dress myself. Because the whole world is in the direction of you need to be more independent. In the sense of independent, in the sense that even stuff that used to be really, really expensive is now available to regular people, but you have to do a lot of it yourself. So there used to be cars, right? There were cars in the 1910s. But who drove a car? You had a driver. You wouldn't get out and, spin the thing to turn the ignition on. There was no key. You had to. So a person who was normal, you didn't. Same thing with a wagon. There were farmers who had wagons, but normal people who lived in cities or in town or wherever, and they needed to get from here to there. So they called the wagon driver. He takes care of the horses. He feeds them. He cleans out after them. Why would? That's not a job for a gentleman.
Jewish boy.
So getting dressed was not a job for a gentleman. So here he says, in his time, I guess it was somewhere in the transition, even though we're talking about late 18th century, but at that time, the way he sees it, it's only the kings that need somebody else to dress them. Really, you have to be a king, maybe. But in any case, it was also true of dukes and of counts and whatever. Anybody who was any kind of nobility did not dress themselves at that time. And to this day, if you go into Buckingham Palace, so I don't know if they put their knickers on themselves or somebody puts it on for them, but certainly everything else they're helped with. But today there's no need, because really, unless you're handicapped, every person can dress themselves. And so this is a very interesting thing, that this is sort of gone from the world. We don't understand this anymore. That if you're a servant, you dress the king. It's an honor.
The Queen of England doesn't put on a new pair of shoes ever.
Right, they put it on. How could she stoop that low?
She doesn't put it on ever, a new pair of shoes. She has a lady
Who wears it for a while.
who wears the shoes.
Until they're nice and soft.
And then she helps her put the shoes.
כמו כן, מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא כמו שהוא בעצמתו, אי אפשר לו להיות מושג ומתגלה בנבראים. תלית מחשב, התפיסה בי. In the same way, Hashem cannot be grasped by his creations because they cannot fathom him. כי אם, unless, על ידי שמתלבש בתורה, שהיא חוכמתו ורצונו ברוך הוא, והלבשה הזו הוא על ידי ישראל דווקא. So we are his servants who dress him, who give him in a way that can be understood, that can be fathomed, that can be grasped by the human mind. וזהו ודיברת בם. And that's what it means when we say ודיברת בם. You should speak in them, in the words of Torah. ודיברת מלשון הנהגה. ודיברת also means ידבר עמים תחתינו. To guide, to lead nations. So here, we're guiding, we're leading the infinite light into reality. That's what we're doing when we're speaking in words of Torah. Hainu hamshachat or ensof ba'Torah. Meaning bringing the infinite light into the Torah. And again, this is through this three-part mechanism of the Torah shebechtav, the Torah sheba'al peh, and the human being, the Jew in the middle, who's bringing them together. וזהו, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי, מי שאנוכי, מהותו ועצמתו יתברך מצווך, לשון התקשרות והתחברות. And that's what it means, that these things are what I am commanding you. Who's I? I is Anochi mi she'anochi, the one who cannot be known. And by doing these mitzvahs, by doing iskashrus and ischabrus, by doing this, you're bringing me into the world. Okay. והכוח הזה שיש בנפש לגרום ההמשכה הזאת על ידי התורה, now the big chiddush is, so until now, what did I think? I thought that learning Torah was the most important thing. But now he tells me
it isn't. It is.
That it doesn't stand by itself. You can't say Torah by itself. Because then, what do you make the Jewish people into? There are a bunch of scholars sitting in their schools, in their academies.
That's how it was.
And they're learning. What?
That's how it was before.
Okay, and Chassidus said this doesn't work. That's not the way it should be. It wasn't exactly like that in the time of Baal Shem Tov. The stress was much more on the Torah. But because Chazal say that Kol HaOmer En Li Ela Torah Afilu Torah En Lo, the person who says, I have only Torah, that's really my only purpose in life. So Chazal say, the sages say, even Torah he doesn't have. Really, he doesn't even have Torah. Why? Because this hamshacha, to bring it down through Torah, hu al yedei atfilah shekadma laTorah. There has to be prayer. Without prayer, this whole thing of Torah doesn't bring anything down. It just becomes an intellectual exercise. It's just something that has to do with a person bettering his intellect. And there are people who love that, who love to sharpen their intellect. And Torah is a great thing for it. but don't call it Torah, he says. Chazal say, don't call this Torah. If all you have is Torah, you don't have even that. Even the people in the time of the sages, and in their time, the most important thing was Torah. The world was leaning on the pillar of Torah at that time. Even in their time, even the people who were patur from davening still davened.
It's very interesting what you just said, because the Chofetz Chaim said we never learned any halacha ever, unless it was for the purpose of doing it.
Okay.
So in other words, it wasn't an intellectual exercise.
Okay, I'm saying
It was in order to be Mekayim. So it wasn't a chassid, but it's moving away from just simply learning it for its own sake, as an intellectual exercise.
I'm trying to see what the similarity is to davening, and I guess I'm missing the point.
No, when you talk about learning Torah, you just said learning it.
So, obviously, it's not just an intellectual exercise because he does something. But he says even if even if you do everything that you learned, it's still not Torah. Not about the mitzvahs. The mitzvahs you did, but the Torah that you learned, there's something essential missing from it. Why? Because it's not bringing anything down. Because the prayer is what makes the Torah able to bring down the infinite light. Now we'll explain why. מפני שצריך להיות תחילה בחינת ואהבת בקריאת שמע למסור נפשו באחד. אמא. מפני שצריך להיות תחילה בחינת ואהבת. Because first you have to come to love Hashem in Kriyas Shema. למסור נפשו באחד. To be willing to give your soul for it. To give your life for it. For your love of Hashem, meaning for your pursuit of godliness, you're willing to give your life. בעניין מסירות נפש, לא כמו שסוברים מהעולם. Now he says, the world thinks that Mesiras Nefesh has to be with a lot of fanfare. That, how do you demonstrate that you're so excited about this, that you're willing to give your life for it? You jump up and down. התלהבות, ברעש, and shouting out. So that's how they daven. אלא הוא כמו שכתוב, אליך השם נפשי אשא.
Why is that Mesiras Nefesh to jump up and down and scream and shout anyway?
That's how they did it. They showed.
Why is that called Mesiras
It's like
Nefesh?
I'm jumping off a cliff. How do you jump off a cliff? Ever seen somebody just calmly walk off? No. If you're gonna jump off a cliff, it's got to be ah! And then of course you're jumping into the water. You're not gonna kill yourself. But you still, that's how you jump off a cliff. But he says that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the act of killing the body. That's not what Mesiras Nefesh is about. Willing to die for it is not, he says, in a certain sense, dying is easy. Not that anybody wants to, but it's one of the easier things to do. Living this way is a lot harder. Okay. And living this way means Elecha Hashem nafshi asa, that I give my soul to you all the time. She'eno rotze liot yesh v'davar nifrad, that the person doesn't want to be a separate being, a separate creation in the world. Ela liot b'chinat bitul, but he wants to nullify himself. Laset nafsho, to offer his soul, v'rucho, and his spirit, elav yitbarach shu mekor ha'chaim dekulo kamei kelo chashive. That he wants to give everything that he has to Hashem in the sense of making it belong to Hashem. It's a tribute. He's giving it to him in order not to remain separate from Hashem. That's what he says really Mesiras Nefesh means. Mesiras Nefesh is to give my living soul to you. And so that what?
As in Shmuel and Ovid.
Okay. And all this is by feeling that everything, all the life force that I have, this is all God's. שבחינת גדולה, שבחינת התפשטות חסדו יתברך להחיות העולמות, אלף אלפים וכולי, רבבות הם משמשנוך, ולך השם בבחינת ביטול, כי כמה יתברך כלו. Because everything before him is like nothing. So to feel that, and from that to come to the point where everything is dedicated, all my abilities, all my feelings, all my efforts, they're all dedicated to godliness. So that's what it means, Mesiras Nefesh.
If you say everything is like nothing to Hashem, then what are we bothering for if it's just nothing anyway?
Because it's not nothing for me.
So why is it then why is it like nothing to Hashem?
It's like nothing.
Why doesn't Hashem get nachas from the fact you're keeping Torah mitzvahs?
He does.
So then why is it nothing?
But that's exactly, no, it's not. It's nothing in the sense it's not separate. It's not a separate thing. Of course it's a something. It's part of him. It's not the way that I feel it. The way that I experience myself and my actions and everything that I do, I experience it as something separate, as something different. I feel that that's what's important about it, is what's important for me. Mesiras Nefesh, offering myself over to Hashem, means that I'm not going to give it value based on what value it has for me, but rather what it looks like from Hashem's point of view. From His point of view, everything that I feel that is separate is like nothing. Not that everything is nothing. It's just not separate. In the same way that a guy who has, I don't know, a billionaire, and he gives somebody a line of credit of $50,000 because he wants to do it tzedakah for him. Everything the guy buys is like nothing for him. Meaning, for the guy who's buying who has no money and $50,000 has just been given to him as a line of credit, this is like the whole world. For that guy who's giving it to him, it's like nothing. In the sense that this is all just an extension of me. Okay, so I got it. I'm holding up another person. It doesn't have value. What has value? What has value is that he comes back to me and he says, "Look, I did this with what you gave me. I did this with what you gave me." That has value for him. But if the guy goes over and he says, "I'll take the $50,000. I'll run away. I'll never see this." So, gesundheit. Just be well. I don't care. When do I care? When you come back to me and you say, "Look at what your money did." And then it means something to me. And if that's the type of money I have. Okay. If, on the other hand, I only had $1 million and I gave you $50,000, and you didn't acknowledge it at all, or nothing, you didn't do anything with it that I think is good to do, so I'd be a little upset. Maybe very upset. It's not like nothing for me. So for Hashem, who has everything, so really, even if you don't do anything with it, it's like nothing. So that's what he did with his life. What can I do? I don't care though. But he comes back to me with the little bit that he did. And he shows me this is because of you. And it has meaning for me. Because he's showing me that he's not separate from me, that he thinks like me, that it was a good investment. This is
Sorry?
Ve'matai gadol, and when is Hashem great? When is he called great? Shu be'ir Elokeinu. When he's in the city of our God. What does it mean, the city of our God? We've seen this many times. A city is made out of buildings, and buildings are made out of stones. And in the Sefer Yetzirah, stones are letters. So, היינו בחינת צירופי אותיות מ10 מאמרות שמחיי עולמות הנבראים, ששם יש בחינת גדולה והתפשטות. So he's great in his city, meaning in his world that is made out of letters. And that's where Hashem can extend, as it were. That's where it has meaning. That's when he's great. So if there's no words being spoken based on these letters of the Torah, meaning there's a world in which all the letters that are being spoken are just nonsense, they're not connected to how Hashem created the world, then Hashem is not extended. He doesn't appear in that world. He doesn't appear in that reality. It's kula kamei kelo chashiv. It's before him as if it was nothing. It's like the guy who went and took the $50,000, squandered it, never got back to the rich man. So he did what he did. I don't feel that I'm extended. The rich man, the guy who gave the tzedakah, doesn't feel that he's extended into this space. Because really, why should a person want to give tzedakah? Really, what's the Yetzer Hara for giving tzedakah?
It's a very interesting question that you ask.
Because there is a Yetzer Hara. Because otherwise...
It's a gigantic Yetzer Hara.
Okay. The Yetzer Hara is, of course, the great me, the great this. That's what the Arabs have. The Arabs have chesed of klipa, and giving for the sake of aggrandizing myself. And that's why they give. Avram gave. He gave, and Yishmael saw it, and he didn't understand. And he thought that Avram was aggrandizing himself, whereas Avram was trying to aggrandize Hashem. He was using the tzedakah in order to get people to serve Hashem, to come to monotheism. Yishmael saw this and he didn't get it. He mixed it all up. And he said, tzedakah, chesed, is for aggrandizing me. To aggrandize Hashem, you kill the people. Yeah, you convert them by the sword. It's much better than converting them with thought or with tzedakah.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, by Islam, that's the preferred mode of converting somebody, by the sword, by threatening to kill them. That's better, because yira, that's the way. So Yishmael, in his nature, is really yira, but his connection with Avram was through the chesed, and the chesed, he got it entirely wrong. He said it's all for aggrandizing me. I give tzedakah to be a great person.
Who says these people wandering around here now got anything to do with Ishmael anyway?
I don't think they're. I have no connection to Ishmael. They're
Well, it's very
a
interesting
hodgepodge of.
Because many years ago, when you were running around in nappies and I was just starting working, right? The expression $1,000 was a sum of money which didn't exist any more than if I would say to you now, can you name me $5 billion? Right? It was a sum that literally didn't exist. And then, as my financial situation improved and as I worked and also so eventually one day I saved up $1,000 and put it in the cupboard and said, okay, so if ever there's a problem, there's an emergency, I have this $1,000 here, and it sits in the cupboard and you don't do anything with it. And then a guy comes and knocks on the door, and he says, I need 10 shekels. I'm marrying off my daughter. He says, sorry, I haven't got any money. And you got $1,000. Yeah, but you can't go and break that. That's for emergency. So I was thinking, where does this Yetzer Hara come from? How does this happen? You think to yourself, you don't need that.
The Yetzer Hara is easy. It's a different Yetzer Hara. It's a Yetzer Hara of fear. You don't live with Hashem.
It's sort of fear. Why do you say fear?
You're what do you mean? Something will happen.
It doesn't mean to say you don't give tzedakah. No.
You do, but not from that.
Not from that, right?
Okay. Because that's my safety. That's my safety blanket.
It's not even a safety blanket. It's much more than that. It's psychological. It says,
okay,
so I have,
I have a backup.
Or I've achieved something, or I've done something. I don't even know what it is.
That's why the Baal Shem Tov,
the
fact that he gave tzedakah from the money he had in his pocket, that wasn't a question.
Yeah.
But the fact that every month, every week, when he came back home, he would clean out the house, exactly to find those $1,000 hidden away somewhere. And to give them away.
Sanzorov couldn't go to sleep at night.
What?
Sanzorov.
Yeah.
Couldn't go to sleep at night.
There was money in the house.
Every penny was in the house. And one night they waited till 2 o'clock in the morning and he couldn't go to sleep.
Couldn't figure out.
He searched the house and he found, 1 ruble and he gave it away. That was him. But what happens is then $1,000 becomes $2,000. You understand?
And then it becomes $100,000.
No, it's weird. Well, we haven't got
one of the biggest problems.
We haven't got to the $100,000 yet, but
one of the biggest problems with the modern world is that it forces you to buy into the idea of insurance.
I don't even think it's that.
That's what insurance is. Insurance, you're insuring yourself, basically. So there come a rainy day, I'll have somewhere to take from. And so you don't want to touch it. Nobody touches their pension funds.
You can say that your son's about to make a bar mitzvah and you want to have $1,000.
Okay, that's something else.
To fill in,
that's something else.
So even so, the bar mitzvah is not for another 3 years. So why can't you go out now?
There's a famous story also with the tzanzer, that he had this newly widowed woman come to him. with her daughter. She says her husband passed away 3 months ago, and the wedding is this week. And they just found out last week that the father owed a lot of money. He had borrowed to make the wedding, and it turned out that he had a lot of other debts. And whatever they had saved up, she had to pay the debtors. Now she has nothing, and she owes for the wedding, and how can she come empty-handed? And they won't want to marry her, and because that's the way it was back then. And there was a simple daichel, it says in the story.
Simple?
Yeah.
No, what was that word?
Daichel.
What is this?
Daichel was like a modern Jew.
Ah, okay. A Deutsche.
Yeah.
Who wears short trousers and a jacket with really Tzaddik Nister, yeah.
Something like that. It wasn't a tzaddik, it was just a simple family. And he also came to the Tzanzer at the same time, and he heard, and he said, "Look, I just came to ask the Rebbe for a bracha, because I have some operation or something, and I have all the money with me, and it's a pretty hefty amount." And he said, I'll give it to this woman so that she's not embarrassed and her daughter can get married. So the Tzanzer said, "I don't need to bless you that you'll be healthy, because you won't need the operation or anything like that anyway. What I'm going to bless you with, that I don't need to do, but what I'm going to bless you with is that from this day on, every single Shabbos for you will be like the Shabbos you just gave this woman. That she can go into Shabbos feeling that everything's fine. And from now on, you and your descendants and everything." And he says that there's a family that he knew that is known to this day. I don't know, that their Shabboses are something special from this blessing.
Hey, how come I never met the son? So?
Anyway, the idea is that the modern world builds itself on insurance. And in a certain sense, you couldn't build the modern world on insurance. On the other hand, it's not true. Is now going through a whole rebuilding.
He's not Jewish, no?
No, he's not Jewish.
That's the strangest.
And again, the non-Jews can take interest from one another. It's only the Mishigas from Christianity that decided that they can't. But the non-Jews can take interest. But it turns out the world is moving more and more to what the Torah wanted. Now, insurance and interest are very connected. They're very, very connected. But this would require a whole